teacher asks you a question, you tell the truth. You're expelled. It's a rat! He's in it up to his eyes, so he ran it to save himself.
He'll test us on that stuff.
Oh, come on, Cameron. Don't you get anything? You know how many demerits we're talking about? No, go, please. All I'm saying is that we have to be careful. Can't get caught.
The following episode contains brief mentions of suicide attempts, mental illness, and a huge calling out of many people viewing TV and films. So if you don't want to be, if you're kind of triggered by those topics, especially the third one of being called out, listener discretion is advised. So without further ado, let's get right into this episode. So I've been getting into Dead Poet Society for the last 3 months. And one of the biggest discourses I've been seeing, particularly on Reddit and TikTok, mostly Reddit, is the fact that Richard Cameron, or Cameron, is written off as a complete villain. And that doesn't really sit right with me. Because out of all the characters, he's a very interesting character to me. He's very complex. And I've been noticing a little bit of a pattern recently with how we as viewers interact with characters on screen and in movies, TV, film, literature, is the fact that when we're giving complex characters, more realistic characters, it just causes us to immediately reject, crash out, and go on a whole inner monologue tangent of how we would never do the things that this character has done. But I've been thinking a lot about Cameron, and I have to say, I am a Cameron apologist. I'm a defender of him. Sorry. When I watched the movie, since the first time I've been watching it, Cameron has my sympathy, even after what he did. Because I'm not really looking at him as a villain. I'm looking at him as a product of his environment. Before we begin, hello everybody. My name is Nick. I am the Pisces Prince. I'm your host of Pisces Prince with Nick Marshall. I basically make episodes talking about whatever I want from the comfort of my home and my car. And I'm just going to be talking about the case study of Richard Cameron from Dead Poet Society. I'm going to be talking about his character. I'm going to be talking about his relationships to the other characters. And I'm going to be asking the huge question of why we don't want complex characters, realistic characters, when we made such a huge stink about we need more complex characters. But we'll all get to that. We're going to get to those 3 things. I'll discuss it with you. Let's discuss. This is an open conversation. Well, it's not really an open conversation. You're just going to be listening to this and I'm just talking right now. But yeah. If you're watching this on YouTube, let me know in the comments about what do you think about Cameron. So without further ado, let's get right into this. So when you look at Cameron's on the Dead Poet Society fandom page, there's not really a whole lot about him. It's just simply brief mention. For his personality according to the Dead Poet Society fandom sheet, Cameron is a morally gray character. Despite his loyalties to the Dead Poets, Cameron is still vehemently afraid of getting in any trouble, yet he decides to follow the rest of the group's actions anyway. Often to the annoyed behest of his roommate Charlie Dalton, he is an avid rule follower who tries to do what he believes is right, and which in times leads to brown-nosing. Cameron is very protective of himself and his reputation, as seen when he turns in the rest of the Dead Poet Society to prevent his and their expulsion because he cared for his friends and their futures. It says here, It also says here on his biography that he's a very active member of the Welton Society Candidates, Debate Club, Crew Team, Service Club, Forensics, and the Arms Counselor. And it says here, in contrast to his friends, Richard Cameron is rather unconvinced by Mr. Keen's teachings, often having a look on his face to show how he felt about the man's methods. Cameron was the third member to join the Dead Poets Society after Charlie and Neil being the first. Honestly, from what I've gathered through my own like interpretation and through me even like watching the film, this whole episode is kind of like gonna be like based off of my own interpretation of his own character, and also from certain fan fictions that I've read that even like broadens my whole perception of him even further to even like make this episode, to even make these claims that I'm making. So the first like segment is like, who really is Cameron? Well, Cameron fits a particular trope in media that's not always talked about in depth, and that and that trope is the teacher's pet. His character overview mainly states that he is very active in Welton's academy, in Welton academics and committees, and he is very proud of it. He is very proud of his reputation as a star student. He's always ready to take notes. He's always initiating study groups, a huge stickler for the rules, and never wants to get any trouble, obviously. He also fits into the overachiever role, if you really think about it, you guys, because Cameron, like anybody, like everyone else in the movie, is under a lot of pressure from the school and his parents to be very successful when he grows up, to become a lawyer, banker, doctor at an Ivy League school, wherever he becomes. My guess is his parents expect him to be a lawyer. That's my like headcanon. And marry a respectable girl of the church and have a family and this very traditional 1950s America, because that's where that's the time period that this film takes place. So obviously his parents have that expectation on him, and it's very possible that he not only internalized it but also has his own moments where he suppresses himself to even fit the mold. A lot of Cameron's characterization in the movie is mostly due to his red hair. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, red hair men and women are very characterized, or are just characterized differently in media. Specifically with red hair men, they're portrayed in media to be very awkward, nerdy, cowardly, not really desirable, and they're usually the butt of everyone's jokes. Basically, to put it simply, the Meg Griffins of this show or the movie. And it's not really like an original take on Cameron's character, because it's so obvious that he kind of fits that red hair stereotype in film and media with how he was characterized, how his actor Dylan Kuzman is also a red hair man. Although I don't really think he really paid that much attention to it, but nonetheless, Cameron is not the only red hair character in the movie. The little Wikipedia page fandom site says that Meeks also has red hair, but like Meeks is not characterized as undesirable or as cowardly. The only thing that he is characterized is mostly nerdy, but he's also characterized as very funny and smart with his own like moments, like with the little screen time he has himself. So what's the big deal with Cameron? Like it's very interesting how Cameron has little screen time as much as anybody else, and he somehow made a good bit of impact. And I feel like if you really like look into it, the fact that he does fit this particular red hair stereotype trope, it really does blend in on how he does fit into the group and how he is made to feel like when he's with the other characters. It should be obvious to the fact that the friend group had already known each other for a little while, and with some are hinted at having known each other for even longer, Neil and Charlie, because It's hinted that Charlie and Neil have known each other for years. For some people, it's headcanon since kindergarten, and it matches the same, like, how do I put this? I feel like that headcanon makes sense with how Charlie was just as devastated as Todd when he learned of Neil's attempt. However, there are only two people in the group who are actually pretty new to the friend group in general, and only one is fully accepted. And while the other is met with little like excitement, or he's met with hesitance. If you don't know who I'm talking about, it should be super obvious. Todd and Cameron, you guys. It's Todd and Cameron. Okay, Todd and Cameron, I'm gonna be comparing these two a lot in this episode. So, yeah. Todd and Cameron share a common reason for why they're in the group in the first place. It's because of Neil. It's sort of implied that Neil has shared a separate friendship with Cameron in the past, and in my interpretation, I feel like Neil and Cameron are more like co-worker friendships at best. And, however, I think that they did like share a good bond because Neil was like generally wanted to like include Cameron when Cameron was introduced. And then keynote, Cameron is introduced separately while we're introduced to the group as a whole later. Like as soon as Cameron leaves the room, Charlie, Knox, and Meeks come into the room, and then the friend group persists. However, Pitts wasn't in the room either, so that's not really like a strong form of evidence, but I feel like that's kind of like how I think about it. But I'm gonna like, you're gonna have to humor, you're just gonna have to humor me, please. Like, please humor me. You're just gonna have to be humoring me a lot in this episode. I have a theory that Cameron was basically kind of in Todd's place, or Todd was in Cameron's place, and Todd replaced him. Now, you're kind of like confused of what I'm saying. Like, so you like you're saying that Neil and Cameron had a very close friendship. You just said that they were like coworkers at best. Well, yes, I did say that. But I also said that they may have like become a little bit close, like in general, because of Neil's wanting to include him in general. I'm not saying that Cameron was in love with Neil, because it's very obvious that Todd and Neil were, at least, I hate that this is even like a debate. They're so obviously in love. Obviously. It's obvious. But I'm not saying that Cameron was in love with Neil. But it's like, again, it's possible that the two have bonded over a potential mutual feeling of like having controlling parents, because Cameron is under a lot of pressure, obviously. But I feel like Cameron internalizing it, he might be more complicit with it. And I feel like he's more of like a sound barrier of Neil's like complaints a little bit. Like, he's there to kind of like listen to Neil kind of like complain about his dad, but Cameron doesn't really like provide that much comfort in the way that Todd and Charlie do, because again, they're not that close. But I feel like Cameron felt very special within his friendship with Neil. But Neil's actions to include both Todd and Cameron are met with different reactions. While Todd is like graciously accepted into the group and had a warm welcome, Cameron was greeted with hesitance and some mocking, mainly from Charlie. I think it's basically because Cameron, again, like I'm going back to the whole fact that Cameron and Neil had a completely separate friendship from the group. And it's largely possible that Cameron wasn't really even like that. He wasn't really friends with any of them, because to me, it's like, it's very hard to like picture him like interacting with them willingly by himself. If anything, I feel like he would mostly talk to Meeks and Todd. Well, really Meeks, because Todd wasn't like there in the beginning, but like I'm talking about in the past. I feel like he would have been friends with Meeks. I don't know. They're just both smart cookies, and I feel like Meeks would be a more easier person to talk to. Also, like Neil. I feel like the fact that he's not that close to the group because he is trying to be the perfect student. He does like want to embody Welton's four pillars, which is discipline, tradition. Wait, hold on. It's the four pillars are tradition, honor, discipline, and excellence. And his basically teacher's pet persona, his attitude, it can rub people the wrong way. It's very obvious that his personality and his need to be the star student, the teacher's pet, and basically in Charlie's case, bootlicking, kissing Nolan's ass, basically. It rubs the students the wrong way. So it's kind of obvious that not a lot of people are going to be vibing with that. Even the students who are more complicit with the rules or complicit with the teachings and the rules of the school, they might not all be that crazy about Cameron. So, he might not have that many actual friends. So obviously Neil's gonna be like his only actual friend who wants to include him, and it's gonna like hurt when, now everyone's like, like when you're invited, when like one friend invites you to a party with a whole group of like their own friends, and the friend group kind of like looks at you weird and like doesn't really acknowledge your existence the whole time. Like, it's not really a good feeling. At times, Cameron is made to be, the Meg Griffin of the group. And that's probably why he wasn't in the scene when Todd found out about Neil, because Neil was also his only reason for being in the group in the first place. Neil was was basically his only friend. And I feel like Cameron did grow to care about them in general because, he did grow to care about them, even though they weren't always the most nicest to him. But, he did care enough about them to like save their future. And to like go back on that video that y'all heard earlier, he made a good point. Like, why would they ruin their own lives? Like, why would they ruin their own future for something that wasn't even their fault in the first place? The Dead Poets Society is not really a bad thing. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were just simply hanging out, sucking the marrow out of life, and they were simply embracing their own individuality. But when Neil killed himself, it opened like this whole can of worms, and Cameron is scared, and he's reclusing back into his old self, into his shell. And I feel like in the future, in my own headcanon, even though on some level they're all still upset with him, they eventually understood why Cameron did what he did. But unfortunately, I feel like one person will never see why Cameron did what he did, and that's Charlie Dalton. The next segment is Charlie and Cameron's relationship. How Charlie and Cameron are set as foils to each other. This is an obvious one. You don't really have to be like an expert in like analyzing media to even like know that this is like a basic opposites attract clashing moment. Charlie and Cameron are basically polar opposites of the other, and immediately we, the viewers, are told that at the start that Charlie does not care for Cameron that much, and the feeling appears to be more than mutual. The biggest thing about the movie is a lot of people are talking about how there's a huge divide between nonconformity and traditional values or conformity. But there's also something else. There's a huge divide on the revolutionary and the conformist, and within 4 characters we do see that. Charlie and Neil are the revolutionary, and Todd and Cameron are the conformist. But we mostly see this within the dynamic of Charlie and Cameron. Charlie is a revolutionary. He's always been revolutionary. And Cameron is the conformist. And within these two opposing views, it's obvious that it's just gonna clash in a very ugly way. From what you heard early on in this episode, it does clash in a very ugly way. Charlie's story arc is treated as a cautionary tale on sometimes flying too close to the sun, with being revolutionary, with being the wild card all the time, with no one to stop him sometimes and let him think. Because Charlie did a reckless thing, similar to Cameron, which was revealing the identity of the club with his whole newspaper thing. It almost caused a lot of problems. And when we found out that he was expelled, that was very sad. And we don't really know what happened. My guess is all hell broke loose with his parents and something bad happened. And he also was very devastated when Neil killed himself. He was just as devastated. If you've seen the funeral scene, Charlie is just simply staring out nothing. He's just empty. Something bad happened. I've read a fanfic where something actually did bad happen to him, and I hope that did not happen. I don't want to say what happened because it's gonna bring down the mood of the episode, but it's just devastating. There's also another thing. This is where you humor me again. Please humor me about this. but it makes sense, so please humor me. This is another theory. I have another theory about their relationship. It's very possible that Charlie and Cameron had a relationship, or Cameron had feelings for Charlie. I wouldn't say relationship. I read one fanfic where they were just it was mostly a physical, casual thing, honestly. I feel like that's more accurate, to be honest. Oh god, it's so obvious, but it makes complete sense in my own headcanon for the fact that Cameron is gay and he's internalizing some conformity, a little bit of internalized homophobias, the internalized homophobias, and he was harboring some feelings for Charlie, both romantic and some sexual feelings. It's so possible that Charlie and Cameron had some, repressed feelings for each other, both romantic and sexual, that they're channeling into some hostilities a little bit. It's possible. It's possible because they bicker like an old married couple sometimes. And even though the end of their relationship, it came to some ugly blows and some hurtful words have been said, it's possible that they probably did have some feelings for each other, or they had a casual physical relationship. It's not a far off theory because, one, it's an all boys school, obviously, and second, think about it, a closeted teacher's pet, overachiever, in love with the wild card of the school, and he's not supposed to, and he double downs on his rule following instinct, and it just brings him down in the process. It makes so much sense for Cameron's character. And yeah. To add more on that, it's giving Monica and Chandler, kinda. I feel like they're giving me Monica and Chandler vibes because Cameron is like Monica. Very organized, very rule following. OCD probably. Charlie is very free and like wild, and I feel like their dynamic would be more enjoyable to watch because Cameron is also very high maintenance, but Charlie I feel like wouldn't mind maintaining him. Wouldn't mind like maintaining him, just like Chandler wouldn't mind maintaining Monica. To add more to that, I sometimes think his involvement with the group in the first place is to like prove Charlie wrong and to mostly impress Charlie because like look, Cameron likes to put on a facade that he might not care about what all these people think about him. Like he's teacher's pet. I'm doing it bad all by myself. Y'all won't even know. That's kind of his vibe. You know? But I feel like with Charlie, with them being roommates, and Karen seeing how free Charlie is, how popular Charlie is, how everyone just gravitates towards him, how he generally is just simply a fun person. Cameron envies that. He is jealous of him too, along with him having feelings for him too. He wants to be seen as fun in Charlie's eyes, and he does care about what he thinks. So I feel like when that horrible altercation occurred, I feel like a little bit of Cameron's heart broke a little bit because he knows that Charlie is going to hate him forever. And also what makes this headcanon even more like valid, low-key, is the fact that Charlie's actor, Gail Hansen, supports the idea of Charlie being bisexual and also somehow non-binary because of like Charlie changing his name to Nwanda. And yeah, it makes it low-key more valid. Okay, enough about that. We're gonna get to the more nitty-gritty. We're gonna get to the more hard topics of the episode. I've mentioned how four of the main characters in the group represent the divide of the revolutionary and the conformist. And I mentioned how Todd and Cameron are the conformists of the group, while Neil and Charlie are the revolutionary. The reason why I said that is Todd and Cameron are similar, but they're not exactly the same. They're both very high-strung, and they're both rule followers. When you first see them in the beginning, Todd is classified as a stiff by Cameron, pot calling kettle. And, well, Todd is only high-strung because of his anxiety and the feelings of being in Jeffrey's shadow, his older brother. And it caused him to, recluse into himself. However, Cameron presents himself as more put together because he wants to be seen as the perfect student in front of his teacher's eyes, Nolan's eyes. And Cameron has been a student at Welton for years. And this environment of these strict and traditional rules and expectations is all he knows. He became a version of what his authority figures and his parents wanted him to be. And when Todd stood up for Keating in the end, it contradicted what we thought because Todd was never really a conformist. He was always like a revolutionary character. He just needed to be stirred up by Neil and Mr. Keating. But Cameron stayed the same. He stayed the same. He reclused back into himself. But I have a theory. That Cameron, again, he knows that this is all bullshit. He knows that he wants to find his own individuality. He wants to do what he wants. He wants to be fun. He wants to have fun. He wants to do whatever he wants. And he also wants to be seen in a good light in Charlie's eyes. I feel like he also wants to be with Charlie. But I feel like Cameron is afraid. He's afraid. And that goes into the biggest question that I'm going to be answering, is why people don't want complex characters. They just want faux authenticity. When we go back to the hatred for Cameron, he's just simply a reflection of people. Like, he's just simply a reflection of us having our own people-pleasing tendencies, and sometimes having moments of like being conformist to the environment that we live in, and especially in this political like environment. Like, you know, sometimes we have moments where we just simply want to like be quiet and just like fall back, especially when you're like a minority in society. People write him off as a bad person because he chose to write out the poets and himself in order to save them from like simply being expelled in the first place from the school. His choice is not really as black and white as the audience really thinks. Like everything in life, not everything is in black and white. If anything, most of the time, everything is just gray. And we do things for multiple reasons. Anything can be true at once, sometimes. I'm not really excusing his behavior in the end, because most of what he, some of the things that he said in the beginning was a little bit messed up and a little bit inappropriate due to what happened like earlier, like obviously the elephant in the room, Neil. But in the end, he sort of did the right thing, because like he just simply didn't want him and his friends to go up in flames because of Neil's suicide, because it's not their fault. It was Neil's choice in the end, and they shouldn't really have to be paying the consequences for Neil's actions. And even though I said that Cameron is a conformist, I feel like he's a mixture of both a revolutionary character and a conformist. It was just that ultimately he reverted back to what was safe for him. I feel like when he heard about Neil, I assumed it scared him to believe that this is what free thinking and self-expression leads to. This is just my guess again. This is what being out, what being gay leads to, acting on your homosexual tendencies. I feel like that's what Cameron's thinking. Like, this is what acting on this leads to. That's why he turned them in, because he didn't want them to end up the same. He thinks that free thinking and self-expression is going to lead them to all fly into the sun. It's all going to haunt them. It's all going to blow up in their faces. And Cameron, again, is a very complex character, because it's moments like this where I'm starting to realize that people say that they want complex and three-dimensional characters, but when we actually get it, it makes people uncomfortable, because a lot of people in my generation want the authenticities, they want the realness, but when we actually get it through a character like Richard Cameron, we're like, huh, ugh. Kind of thought I was, I kind of thought you weren't gonna go there. Kind of thought you weren't gonna go there. And it's my theory on it scared him so much that he did revert back to himself, and that's why he didn't get on the desk in the first place, because he is scared. He's scared, and he thinks that reclusing back to how he was in the beginning, living a lie, is what's gonna save him from Neil's fate. If anything, he basically just guaranteed his own fate. I hope he doesn't end his own life, but we can only just guess what happens to Karen next. We can only assume. Hopefully good things. But why do we just not like complex characters? Why do we not like complex characters? I've been realizing we put characters on a very high pedestal. It's very weird. We put these fictional characters that are not real on a very high pedestal to be super perfect and be such a model character for us and generations in the future and young generations now to live up to a very impossible idea. And obviously we have like a little bit of an entitlement to like have this attitude because they're not real in the first place. But I'm just gonna be like very real about this, when we're bitching about how characters feel so one note, they're just basically stereotypes. Where are the complex characters? Where are the realistic characters? When we actually get them, it's like, y'all don't actually want complex characters, though. Like, y'all don't want them. Like, what are you talking about? I feel like the main reason why people don't want complex characters is the fact that TV, film, literature is seen as a huge escapism. We use them as like an escape, a fantasy. We like to escape into those realities, and watching your favorite show, seeing people live this life that you want to live, it's like a form of escapism from our own real life, our very ugly human complex feelings. It's actually pretty obvious like why we don't want complex characters, because when we get a complex character, it produces it produces a feeling of like uncomfortable ability, which leads to introspection, which leads to finding a problem, which leads to actually having to deal with said problem. And then we have to like do the long and never linear, boring work to, evolving as a person. And it kind of like, I feel like we kind of like think that complex characters ruin the escapism of TV and film, literature, because we don't want the extra homework assignment of like having to do the hard work, look in the mirror and like see like what can we do to evolve as a person. We feel like watching complex characters is like someone hugging us and having a pack of homework behind their back. We view it like that because I feel like we like to avoid taking accountability, avoid taking any steps in the right direction. We just like feeling stuck. We want to feel static sometimes, which is not really a good it's not really a good trait to have, Another character that does come up when we're having this talk about complex characters is Carrie Bradshaw, because Carrie Bradshaw is also a very well-written character because she was considered to be the first female anti-heroes in TV in the 90s. In the 90s, when Sex and the City was on the air, people loved to be labeled a Carrie, but now in 2025, my generation is waking up and starting to realize that Carrie is not as perfect as everyone's been saying, and she is now being dragged through the mud on TikTok, largely due to her main character syndrome, her narcissism, her relationship to Mr. Big, Aiden, and her being just simply a bad friend. But her relationship with Big is where she gets the most judgment. And I understand people's frustration, but also I feel like she was written for a reason to create this reaction. She was written to kind of like start this like conversation of like what like she's like an example of what not to do in relationships, what not to do when you're dealing with someone who made it clear that they don't want to be with you. And she is a very realistic character of like having to like constantly like learn the same thing like over and over again to like get the message clear to her. And even though in the end she kind of just basically like recluse back to her old like toxic ways when Mr. Big and her got back together, I feel like people's uncomfortability with Carrie is like mostly just like people projecting a lot of themselves on the Carrie because of the fact that Carrie is just like a reflection of us when it comes to her relationship to Mr. Big, and we don't really want to think about that. Her her insecurities are like some insecurities that we've thought about ourselves when, dealing with people like Mr. Big. And I myself have related a lot to Carrie, I really did relate to Carrie a lot in the show when I watched Sex in the City. In both good ways and bad ways. And I feel like since I watched Sex in the City, Carrie is a huge example of what not to do in relationships when if I ever like have a desire to get into a relationship in general. And she is a perfect example of like a complex character that is given to the audience, especially the fact that she's a female character and female characters are expected to be perfect and then be down on their luck. But Carrie is not like that. It's like always like it's like a constant up and down, up and down. And you're not always gonna like her all the time. And that's the point of characters. We're not supposed to like characters all the time. Like we're supposed to like them 1 minute and just be frustrated with them the next. Because even though we view movies, TV, literature as a form of escapism, sometimes there has to be a reality to it in that escapism. Because when we indulge too much into the idealistic like fantasy in these media forms, it kind of warps our brain to think in a very one-dimensional place. It produces like a black and white thinking of like, well, this character did this, so they're automatically this, and it's all this mess. It's just so much mess that it doesn't really put us in a position to do critical thinking, to put on our reading glasses and simply read between the lines on why a character is the way they are, why the character does what they do, why the story turned out the way that it did. And sometimes it's not always like, again, it's not always black and white. It's not always black and white. Finally, last but not least, what can we say about Richard Cameron? What can we say about him? What can we say? Overall, in my opinion, Cameron is just simply a teenager at the end of the day who was under a lot of pressure from the people around him. And was also going through a huge loss, like the other boys. Dead Poets Society is not only a classic, but it's also a very tragic film because we don't really get a happy ending with the characters. And three of the characters, Neil, Keating, and Charlie, were out the door, practically. And the others are possibly getting expelled. Richard sadly regressed back to how he was in the beginning out of fear. And there are many people like Richard Cameron, the teacher's pet, the overachievers, the odd one out in the group. It's easy to write them off as stiff or as a perfect little know-it-all. But I hope that when you do your little annual rewatch of Dead Poets Society, you think of this episode and simply look at Cameron and just simply give him a little bit of grace. Because, again, he was just a teenager. And we all grieve in different ways when we go through things like this. That's kind of all I have to say. That's my take on Richard Cameron. So, that's all I have for today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Pisces Prince. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. If you made it this far, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, anywhere you stream podcast. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at Pisces Prince Podcast, all lowercase. And on TikTok, Pisces Prince Podcast _ all lowercase. You can follow me, Nick.Marshall02. And this is not the last episode I'm doing on That Poet Society. I might do another That Poet Society episode in the future. Not next time, but maybe soon. But this has been a topic that's been on my mind for a minute. And anyway, I hope you guys have a beautiful rest of your day, week, month, year. And thanks for hanging out. We'll talk again sooner than you think. All right. Bye.